Education in Mexico has a long history. The Royal and Pontifical University of Mexico was founded by royal decree in 1551, a few months after the University of San Carlos in Lima. By comparison, Harvard College, the oldest in Anglo-America, was founded in 1636. Education in Mexico was until relatively recently largely confined to elite males and under the auspices of the Roman Catholic Church in Mexico. The Mexican state has been directly involved in education since the 19th century, promoting secular education. Control of education was a source of ongoing conflict between the Mexican state and the Roman Catholic Church, which since the colonial era had exclusive charge of education. The mid-19th century liberal reforms separated church and state, which had a direct impact on education. President Benito Juárez sought the expansion of public schools. During the lengthy tenure of President Porfirio Díaz, the expansion of education became a priority under a cabinet-level post held by Justo Sierra. Sierra also served President Francisco I. Madero in the early years of the Mexican Revolution. The 1917 Constitution strengthened the Mexican state's power in education, undermining the power of the Roman Catholic Church to shape the educational development of Mexicans. During presidency of Álvaro Obregón in the early 1920s, his Minister of Public Education José Vasconcelos implemented a massive expansion of access to public, secular education. This work was built on and expanded in the administration of Plutarco Elias Calles by Moisés Sáenz. In the 1930s, the Mexican government under Lázaro Cárdenas mandated socialist education in Mexico, and there was considerable pushback from the Roman Catholic Church as an institution. Socialist education was repealed during the 1940s, with the administration of Manuel Ávila Camacho. A number of private universities have opened since the mid-20th century. Education in Mexico is currently regulated by the Secretariat of Public Education. Education standards are set by this ministry at all levels except in autonomous universities chartered by the government. Accreditation of private schools is accomplished by a mandatory approval and registration with this institution. Religious instruction is prohibited in public schools. However, religious associations are free to maintain private schools, which receive no public funds. In the same fashion as other education systems, education has identifiable stages: primary school, junior high school, higher education, and postgraduate education. Structure of the basic education system. In Mexico, basic education is normally divided in 3 steps. Primary school, comprising grades 1 to 6, junior high school, comprising grades 7 to 9, and high school, comprising grades 10 to 12. Depending on definitions, primary education comprises primaria and secundaria, which are compulsory by law, while secondary education only includes preparatoria, which was not compulsory a few years ago, but it has been made mandatory as well. Primary school. The terms primary school or elementary school usually corresponds to primaria, comprising grades 1 to 6. When the student's age is 6 to 12 years old, it starts the basic compulsory education system. Depending on the school, a bilingual education may be offered from the beginning, where half the day instruction is in Spanish, and the rest is in a second language, for example, English, French, Zazzle or Ziltal. Junior high school. The terms junior high school or middle school usually correspond to secundaria, comprising grades 7 to 9. When the student's age is 12 to 15 years old, it is part of the basic compulsory education system. It follows primary school, and comes before high school. At this level, more specialized subjects may be taught, such as physics and chemistry, and world history. There is also the technical, which provides vocational training, and the telesecundaria, which provides distance learning. Despite the similarities of the words secondary school and secundaria, in Mexico the former is usually translated to preparatoria, while in other countries, such as Puerto Rico, or within the Spanish-speaking populations of the United States, the term secundaria refers to high school. The terms school or gymnasium usually corresponds to preparatoria or bachillerato, and follow secundaria, comprising grades 10 to 12, when the student's age is 15 to 18 years old. Students may choose between two main kinds of high school programs: the September Incorporated A and a University Incorporated 1, depending on the state. Other minority of programs are available only for private schools, such as the International Baccalaureate, which carries a completely different system. Nevertheless, in order to be taught, it must include a national subject at least. In addition, there are programs such as Tecnología and Comercio that prepare students for a particular vocational career. Preparatoria traditionally consists of 3 years of education, divided into 6 semesters, with the first semesters having a common curriculum, and the latter ones allowing some degree of specialization, either in physical sciences or social sciences. The term bachillerato is most commonly used for institutions that offer a 3-year education program that prepares the student with general knowledge to continue studying at a university. In contrast, the term preparatoria is most often used for institutions that provide vocational training in 2 or 3 years, so the graduate can get a job as a skilled worker, for example, an assistant accountant, a bilingual secretary, or an electronics technician. In recent years, the progression through Mexican education has come under much criticism. While over 90% of children in Mexico attend primary school, only 62% attend secondary school. After secondary school, only a quarter pass on to higher education. A commonly cited reason for this is the lack of infrastructure throughout the rural schools. Moreover, the government has been criticized for paying teachers too much and investing too little into the students. In its annual report on education, the OECD has placed it below average in mathematics, science, and reading. Higher education. There are both public and private institutions of higher education. Higher education usually follows the U.S. education model with an at least 4-year bachelor's degree undergraduate level, and 2 degrees at the postgraduate level, a 2-year master's degree, and a 3-year doctoral degree. This structure of education very closely conforms to the Bologna process started in Europe in 1999, allowing Mexican students to study abroad and pursue a master's degree after licenciatura, or a doctoral degree after maestria. Unlike other OECD countries, the majority of Mexico's public universities do not accredit part-time enrollment programs. Undergraduate studies normally last at least 4 years, divided into semesters or quarters, depending on the college or university, and led to a bachelor's degree. According to OECD reports, 23% of Mexicans youth from ages 23 to 35 have a college degree. Although in theory every graduate of a licenciatura is a licentiate of his or her profession, it is common to use different titles for common professions such as engineering and architecture. Engineer, ingeniero, abbreviated ING. Electrical engineer, ingeniero electrico. Electronics engineer, ingeniero electronico-mechanical engineer, ingeniero mecánico. Computer systems engineer, ingeniero en sistemas computacionales, abbreviated ISC. Architect, arquitecto, abbreviated ARQ. Licentiate, any degree, especially those from social sciences. Licenciado, abbreviated LIC. Postgraduate studies. New regulations since 2005 divide postgraduate studies at Mexican universities and research centers in 2 main categories: targeted at professional development or specialization. A one-year course after a bachelor's degree, which awards a specialization diploma. Maestria, a two-year degree after a bachelor's degree, which awards the title of master, targeted at scientific research. Maestria en Ciencias, a two-year degree after a bachelor's degree, which awards the title of Master of Science. Doctorado en Ciencias, a three-year degree after a master's degree, or a four-year degree directly after the bachelor's degree for high-achieving students, which awards the title of Doctor of Science. Educational years. School years. The table below describes the most common patterns for schooling in the state sector. International education. As of January 2015, the International Schools Consultancy listed Mexico as having 151 international schools. ISC defines an international school in the following terms. ISC includes an international school if the school delivers a curriculum to any combination of preschool, primary or secondary students, wholly or partly in English outside an English-speaking country, or if a school in a country where English is one of the official languages, offers an English medium curriculum other than the country's national curriculum and is international in its orientation. This definition is used by publications including The Economist. History. In central Mexico, the history of education stretches back to the pre-Hispanic era, with the education of Nahuas in schools for elites and commoners. A formal system of writing was created in various parts of central and southern Mexico, with trained experts in its practice. After the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire, friars embarked on a widespread program of evangelization of Christianity. In the colonial era, schooling of elite men of European descent was established under the auspices of the Catholic Church. Liberals' attempts to separate church and state in post-independence Mexico included removal of the Catholic Church from education. Education remains an important aspect of Mexican institutional and cultural life, and conflicts continue about how it should be conducted. The history of education in Mexico gives insight into the larger history of the nation. Education in Mesoamerica before the Spanish. In the central Mexico in a cultural area known as Mesoamerica, the Aztecs set up schools called Camcac for the training of warriors and schools for the training of priests, called Cuicacali. An early post-conquest manuscript prepared by native scribes for the Viceroy of Mexico, Codex Mendoza, shows these two types of schools. Aztec religion was highly complex and priests held a high status, so that the creation of schools to train them in ritual and other aspects of religion was important. Overseeing an imperial, expansionist empire, Aztec rulers needed trained warriors, so that the creation of formal schools for their training was as important. Colonial-era education, 1521 to 1821. Education of the indigenous in central Mexico. The Spanish crown made a significant commitment to education in colonial New Spain. The first efforts of schooling in Mexico were friars' evangelization of indigenous populations. Educating the native population was a crucial justification of the colonizing enterprise, and that Criollo culture was encouraged as a vehicle for integrating the indigenous. Fray Pedro de Gante established schools for indigenous in the immediate post-conquest years and produced pictorial texts to teach Catholic doctrine. All the mendicant orders in Mexico, the Franciscans, Dominicans, and Augustinians, built churches in large indigenous communities as places of worship and to teach the catechism, so that large outdoor atriums functioned as classrooms. Elite indigenous lads were tapped for training as catechists and helpers to the priests, whose small numbers could in no way minister to large numbers of ordinary indigenous. In 1536, the Franciscans and the Spanish crown established a school to train an indigenous Catholic priesthood, the Colegio de Santa Cruz de Tlatelolco, which was deemed a failure in its goal of training priests. but did create a small cohort of indigenous men who were literate in their native language of Nahuatl, as well as Spanish and Latin. The Franciscans also founded the School of San José de los Naturales in Mexico City, which taught trades and crafts to boys. The Colegio de San Gregorio was also founded for the education of indigenous elites, the most famous of whom was Caymal Pajín. Religious orders, particularly the Franciscans, taught indigenous scribes in central Mexico to be literate in their own languages, allowing the creation of documents at the local level for colonial officials and communities to enable crown administration as well as production of last will and testaments, petitions to the crown, bills of sale, censuses and other types of legal record to be produced at the local level. The large number of indigenous language documents found in the archives in Mexico and elsewhere have enabled scholars of the new philology to analyze life of Mexico's colonial era indigenous from indigenous perspectives. Education of elite Creole men. The Royal and Pontifical University of Mexico was founded in September 1551 at the request by Mexico's first viceroy, Don Antonio de Mendoza, to the Spanish crown. The university was located in the central core of history of Mexico City. Its first rector, Francisco Cervantes de Salazar, wrote an account of the university. The institution initially trained in priests, lawyers, and starting in 1579, medical doctors. These were the traditional disciplines of the medieval and early modern eras. The Royal and Pontifical University was the sole institution that could confer academic degrees. With the title of Royal and Pontifical University, its degrees were titled the same as European degrees. The Jesuits arrived in Mexico in 1571 and rapidly founded schools and colegios, and sought to confer degrees. However, the Council of the Indies, the royal entity overseeing the Spanish overseas empire, decided against them. The university retained its premier position. One of its best-known graduates was Don Carlos de Sigüenza y Góngora, a Mexican savant of the 17th century, who was a friend of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, a cloistered nun and intellectual. Famous in her lifetime as the 10th Muse, Sor Juana was barred from attending the university due to her gender. In general, educational institutions were urban-based, with the capital Mexico City having the largest concentration. However, there were seminaries to train priests in provincial cities, such as the Colegio de San Nicolás, founded by Bishop Vasco de Quiroga in the city now called Morelia. Insurgent leader Father Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla served as rector there until he was relieved of his position. One of his students was insurgent leader Father José María Morelos. Educated priests were prominent in the movement toward independence from Spain. Education of girls and mixed-race children. Most of the Mexican population was illiterate and entirely unschooled, and there was no priority for education of girls. A few girls in cities attended schools run by cloistered nuns. Some entered convent schools at around age 8. To remain cloistered for the rest of their lives, there were some schools connected to orphanages or confraternities. Private tutors educated girls from wealthy families, but only enough so that they could oversee a household. There were few opportunities for mixed-race boys or girls. Education was, in short, highly selective as befits a stratified society, and the possibilities of self-realization were a lottery of birth rather than talent. Post-independence era, 1821-present, when Antonio López de Santa Anna put his liberal vice president Valentín Gómez Farías in charge of running the government. The vice president created in 1833 a public education system. This preceded the establishment of a Ministry of Public Education. This reform was short-lived, but with the liberal reform in the mid-19th century, a normal school for teacher training was established. The Liberals' push for public education awaited the end of the War of the Reform and the ousting of the French Empire in Mexico. The restored Republic of President Benito Juárez reaffirmed the liberal principles separation of church and state, which in the educational sphere meant supplanting the Catholic Church by the Mexican state. Primary education in Mexico was henceforth to be secular, free of fees and tuition, and obligatory. A key figure in higher education in Mexico was Gabino Barreda, who chaired Juárez's Commission on Education in 1867. Barreda was a follower of French intellectual Auguste Comte, who established positivism, the dominant philosophical school in the late 19th century. The Juárez government created a system of secondary education, and a key institution was the National Preparatory School, founded in 1868 in Mexico City, which Barreda directed. Education at the Preparatorio uniform for all students and was designed to fill what José Díaz Covarrubias identified as the traditional void between primary and professional training. In 1910, the government of Porfirio Díaz under the Minister of Education Justo Sierra established the secular, state-controlled Universidad Nacional de Mexico. The Pontifical University of Mexico under religious authority was suppressed in 1865. The government expanded normal schools after the Mexican Revolution of 1910. The 1960 National Census illustrates the historically poor performance of the Mexican educational system. The 1960 census found that as to all Mexicans over the age of 5, 43.7% had not completed 1 year of school. 50.7% had completed 6 years or less of school, and only 5.6% had continued their education beyond 6 years of school. In 1950, Mexico had only 3 million students enrolled in the education. Today, there are 32 million enrolled students. In 2012, some teachers from rural areas, specifically from Michoacán and Guerrero states, opposed federal regulations which prevented them from automatic lifetime tenure, the ability to sell or will their jobs, and the teaching of either English or computer skills. In 2015, 96.2% of 6 to 14-year-olds attended school, up from 91.3% in 2000. The state with the highest attendance rate was Hidalgo and the state with the lowest attendance rate was Chiapas. In the same year, 63% of 3 to 5-year-olds attended preschool or kindergarten, up from 52.3% in 2010. Also in 2015, 44% of 15 to 24-year-olds attended secondary or tertiary school, an increase from 32.8% in 2000.